All right, joining me now, Mark Medina. Mark, has this NBA Finals series been as competitive as you expected it to be? I know that Denver was kind of a juggernaut coming in, and it was will they, won't they, have some rust, but this has been fairly one-sided.
Yeah, I think it's been as best as it could be, realistically speaking, on both sides. I don't think that it's been the Denver Nuggets just running out and dominating every single game. Clearly, they're up 3-1 heading into game five, but the Miami Heat have kept it competitive, being able to steal game two, showing that they can still be in the mix game to game. But the reality is this: the Denver Nuggets are exerting their dominance. It's a reason why they were the number one seed in the Western Conference because of their talent, chemistry, and continuity. And I think on the Miami Heat side, they're finally showing that their limitations are what they are as an eighth seed. They have a lot of good star power. They have their own depth and good coaching, but yeah, I think it's reached its max capacity.
With that in mind, do you think this ends tonight?
I think so. I mean, look, I think it's going to be a competitive game. I think Miami's going to come out swinging, but the Denver Nuggets have shown that when their effort is consistently there, their depth ultimately prevails. And I think when you add in the fact that they're going to be in Denver, they're in front of a supportive home crowd, and they have learned their lesson of what happens when you put your foot off the gas a little bit in that game two loss. I don't think the Nuggets are going to mess around. So I think it's going to play out this way. I think that both teams will try to throw some early punches first. There'll be some back and forth. But I think ultimately in the second quarter onward, the Nuggets will just continue to create more and more separation. Miami won't ever quit. They never have done that this season. But I think inevitably the Nuggets' dominance will just continue to play out the rest of the game.
Yeah, you've seen that identity play out in this series, and it's clear that they're not willing to mentally throw in the towel, but that they might just not have the firepower to contend with the Denver team as deep and as talented as they are. If Miami can win this game, who do you think it will ultimately come down to tonight?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that it's going to be a team effort, but ultimately, if you look at the percentage pie, it's going to have to rely on Jimmy Butler. He's played a respectable NBA Finals so far, but he hasn't gone peak playoff Jimmy, where we saw him against the Milwaukee Bucks and the Boston Celtics, just taking over the game. Part of that has had to do with the quality of the opponent. The Denver Nuggets have been really good defensively. But I think that when you look at Miami Heat's identity, as much as you'd like to say, yeah, let's get Bam Adebayo to shoot more threes and let's have more consistency with some of their role players, with a Max Strus, a Caleb Martin, a Duncan Robinson. The reality is you're probably asking more than what they're capable of fulfilling, where we've seen Jimmy Butler have these kind of performances. Again, the onus isn't necessarily on him. He's been competitive. He's brought his best effort, but we haven't seen those playoff Jimmy type moments quite yet. And so if Miami does win game five, I suspect it'll mostly have to do with Jimmy just unleashing the absolute best version of himself.
And to your point, what you really just said, I mean, is that because Denver has been able to neutralize him in a way in these playoffs that nobody else can? I mean, we saw in the last series, in Miami's last series, a couple of games where like maybe he didn't show up or go full on playoff Jimmy Butler, like you said. I mean, what is the percentage of him maybe being able to dig a little bit deeper, showing up on a really big stage versus just finally running into the team that will limit his productivity?
Yeah, I'll give you three things. I think the first thing, it's been the Nuggets defense. You have guys like Aaron Gordon, who is a very big interior player that has been able to show that he can also guard on the perimeter. He's been the primary defender and a great one at that. And then you have some other great wing players in a Contavious Caldwell-Pope and a Bruce Brown. So the fact that they have a lot of a lot of versatile wings, and Aaron Gordon, a versatile interior player, that's, I think, reason number one. Reason number two is Miami Heat's supporting cast. They haven't been consistent with their outside shots. So as a result of that, Jimmy Butler can't fully punish the Nuggets for paying a lot more attention to him defensively, and also hasn't caused the Nuggets to have to reevaluate who they prioritize on the floor. And then three, yeah, maybe Jimmy Butler can dig a little bit deeper. I think especially in game one, there were times by his own admission that he was settling for jump shots as opposed to attacking the rim. I think the reality is if the number two things aren't settled enough, there's only so much that Jimmy Butler can do.
Is there, you would think that Spoelstra would get his guys ready to play in an elimination game. Is there anything that Spo hasn't done, in your opinion, to put this team in position to have success in this series?
No, and I think that's the frustrating part with Miami. I think their competitiveness has never been in question. Their preparation has never been in question. He's made adjustments all he can. I think the most notable one was starting Kevin Love beginning in game 2 to add another interior presence, help space the floor. He obviously has had a much more reduced role in coming off the bench and having limited minutes compared to his prime years in Cleveland and Minnesota, but he has that championship experience. But I don't think really it's come down to, any coaching shortcomings or any effort shortcomings. The reality is when you tally all these things up, it's personnel shortcomings. The Nuggets just have a much more complete team than the Miami Heat. And I think that leads into a very interesting question this offseason, assuming that this is the end result, whether the Denver Nuggets win the NBA championship in game 5 or game 6. What did the Miami Heat do with their roster? And I think clearly it's reached its peak where you think, okay, if they want to win the championship and that's what they're about, they're going to have to make some changes. But what do you do? It seems like if you're going to continue to try to build outside of Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo, it's really hard to put all those other complementary pieces together to get a quote unquote third star. And I think at the same time, if they were able to manage doing that, would that even be the better play? Because I think, especially in today's NBA, there is a lot to be said about having good supporting cast role players, good depth, as opposed to having just such top heavy lineups. So, given that Pat Riley's known to be very creative, very shrewd with the salary cap, so I suspect he will be aggressive in navigating that tightrope, but it's one hefty challenge that they're going to have to figure out.
Yeah, you would hate to see the whole thing get blown up, but I mean, with the way that the landscape is, do you have to lose some of that star weight in order to bring in complementary pieces that will actually add to depth and be able to contribute in a meaningful way on a big stage like this? You mentioned Kevin Love. That's interesting to see him kind of come in and contribute in a meaningful way, being past his sort of prime in that respect. But how many players are there in the league that can add that depth without costing a team a ton of money?
Yeah, that's the thing. I can't really think of an example. I know that it's been floated out there about, hey, let's see the Miami Heat pursue Damian Lillard, and I think that there's just so many dominoes there. For example, I mean, there's been signals that Damian Lillard likes the Miami Heat, but Portland has never changed its stance about wanting to trade Damian Lillard. It's been a capital NO. And I think at the bottom line, as much as there has been frustration from both sides of how they finally get to that championship level, I don't think that they would ever part ways. But if that were to ever happen, I think Portland would be looking for just a long haul where you're looking at the equivalent of when the Denver Nuggets traded Carmelo Anthony to the New York Knicks. Carmelo Anthony may have gotten his wish to come to the New York Knicks, but he arrived with basically a barren roster. And I don't think the Miami Heat would do that. And I think that what you said really perfectly encapsulates the challenge here. I don't think Miami's looking to blow up anything. They want to further continue to build around Bam Adebayo and Jimmy Butler because they're winning type players and they're really good as far as their skill set goes. But what can you do with all those role players to get even complementary pieces? I can't think of a single scenario. But the good thing is for the Heat, Pat Riley, I'm sure, probably can think of those scenarios and then make that calculus. Is it better off for there to be some incremental changes or continue to improve from within and see if that's all they really need to finally get over that hump to win a title?
It's a fascinating thing to think about. It really is, because the answer just doesn't seem clear. And again, that's why you've got guys that make more than we do, I guess, making those decisions. I mean, they don't have they certainly have one of the best coaches in the game that could maybe develop some kind of younger talent and have them be impactful. But it'll be interesting to see what happens this offseason. Just back to Nikola Jokic and the Nuggets. The macro story, I think, well, maybe it's not the big story, but one of the stories I like about this is that he's a Serbian player and it's a global game more so than ever, where you've got all these really talented players coming from all around the world now to get into the game. And it's been a big week for Serbia in general because they've got Novak Djokovic, setting records in tennis. And now they potentially have this MVP caliber player bringing a championship to Denver. When you have an MVP who's an international star, or who is more international than, say, a homegrown talent, what are the ripple effects of that, the sort of repercussions of that throughout the game, to have such a visible star win a championship and be from somewhere else?
Well, it's huge. And I think that the ripple effect is multi-generations to come, because when you have Nikola Jokic, you mentioned his ties with Serbia, you create a whole new fan base. And look, basketball is popular there. There's a reason why Nikola Jokic got involved with basketball to begin with. But when you have a homegrown talent that's become a star player, all of a sudden that specific country is tuned in to what Nikola Jokic is doing, buying Nuggets memorabilia, and all that. But also think of the impact that it has on the next generation of players. You can only look at this year's Hall of Fame class to recognize the impact that the international game has had. You look at players like Pau Gasol and Dirk Nowitzki, and Tony Parker, all obviously international players. Pau from Spain, Dirk from Germany, Tony from France. Greg Popovich, the Spurs coach, he was known to be one of the first coaches in the NBA to really embrace having a multicultural team, because he felt like, hey, the game is growing internationally. And even though, obviously the Americans have always been superior in most Olympic games, and the NBA is the best basketball league in the world, there are a lot of good international players. And Pop also saw the value in having a team represent a melting pot of learning each other's cultures, embracing each other's differences, and knowing how to play within a team concept with that. But you think of those three specific Hall of Fame candidates. I know, covering Pau Gasol during his time with the Lakers, he talked time and time again on how, Magic Johnson and the Dream Team playing in Barcelona in 1992 really piqued his interest in wanting to play basketball. So you fast forward here now with Nikola Jokic with the Denver Nuggets, whether or not he wins an NBA championship, and my hunch is that he will. That's going to have that next inspiring story for that next star that we don't know exists, but is currently born somewhere in Serbia, that in years to come is going to say, Nikola Jokic winning those MVPs, winning that championship really got me interested in basketball. And then here he is, decades later in the NBA dominated. So it'll be interesting to see the generational ripple effects to come. We know what's going to happen. We just have to fill in the blanks.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a cool aside of everything that Serbian fans are sort of celebrating this week in the sports arena. What will this championship, assuming that it happens, do to elevate Denver as a franchise? I mean, does this put them a little bit more on the map? Or are they always going to kind of remain one of the teams that people who are in the know about, but don't necessarily break through to have that sort of mainstream quality? How do you view that?
Yeah, well, look, it's huge. You can't downplay the accomplishment. This is going to be their first NBA championship in franchise history. They were in the ABA finals in 1976, but they had never been in the NBA finals since that merger. So that's huge. I think, as far as their high profile, no doubt they're going to get more respect, from top to bottom, especially the fact that after getting to the Western Conference Finals in the bubble, they had some playoff shortcomings. And I think that as a result of that, there was some commentary that the Nuggets are just a good regular season team, but nothing more than that. But I think when you weigh all the factors, A, they played a lot of good teams during those playoff runs, but B, they had a lot of injuries, most notably to Jamal Murray. But as far as I think the macro, how they look in the NBA landscape, they could be, the next San Antonio Spurs, or their respected team, but they don't get the kind of fanfare and attention that the Los Angeles Lakers get, for example. But I think the good thing that the Nuggets should feel optimistic about themselves is that this isn't just a one-off deal. They have a lot of continuity. All their players are in their prime with Jokic, Jamal Murray. And I think that this is really a testament to the Nuggets organization and being very well run from top to bottom, as well as having patience during kind of those fork in the road moments with the playoff shortcomings, Jamal Murray's injury. Michael Malone has been a coach, I think, since the 2014-15 season. And just knowing the NBA landscape in general, coaches' job securities have always been tenuous, but they've been sticking with him because, hey, he's a good coach, but they also saw the big picture even when they weren't able to progress in a linear fashion. So I think other teams should take note that while you never want to have a team just be complacent and do the same things over and over again when things aren't working, there is a value in maintaining patience and continuity to get through certain hardships.
Yeah, absolutely. So is this championship window maybe just opening, in your opinion?
Without a doubt. Now, that being said, you also have to account for the rest of the landscape. We don't know what moves other teams are going to make. You have some suspicion that, there are certainly question marks with teams like the Phoenix Suns and the Lakers and the Warriors, but they still have star players on those teams, and who knows what kind of changes they have this offseason. They also have had shorter playoff runs this year. So as a result, they're able to rest a lot more this summer. They're going to be coming back, ready to be loaded. So no doubt the Nuggets are going to be in that championship picture. Their window is not a one-off, but they're also going to face a lot of good competition. And that's inevitably what happens whenever you win NBA championship. All of a sudden you have teams gunning for you. But I think that internally they have what it takes, but they're not going to be necessarily the inevitable runaway favorites, but I think one of many possible contenders that could win next season.
Would it surprise you at all to see Jimmy Butler have a huge game tonight and push this thing to another game?
It wouldn't surprise me at all. It would be just very on brand for what Jimmy Butler is all about, that when the back's against the wall, he just, empties the tank and just pours it all out. Now, I would be surprised if the Miami Heat win an NBA championship. The reality is there's only been one team in the Cleveland Cavaliers in 2016 to overcome a 3-1 series deficit in finals history. And in that specific year, the Cavs were considered, the best team in the Eastern Conference. And there are different other things that factors that went their way, with Draymond Green's suspension in Game 5, Steph Curry not being 100%, LeBron James obviously just in the prime, playing out of his absolute mind, Kyrie Irving hitting big shots as well. But it wouldn't surprise me at all if the Heat win this game. I think that the Nuggets will win, but it would be kind of fitting and on brand for the Heat to overachieve once again, because they've been doing that this entire postseason.
That's great stuff, Mark. Just real quick before I let you go, do you expect it to be a pretty volatile offseason? I mean, I know we've all got our eyes sort of on this final series, and it'll probably wrap up sooner than later. But, what is your sense of what the summer is going to ultimately bring?
It just seems like it's inevitable that every offseason's volatile, because that's just how the NBA works. I think that the fascinating thing is there's not a list of specific, no doubt, free agents that you got to keep your eye on. I mean, I guess you would keep your eye on guys like Kyrie Irving and Fred VanVleet, but I think in Kyrie's case, because of his baggage, it's not like I think that there's going to be a line of suitors or anything else. I think what I'm getting at is there's not going to be this huge one or two free agents that's just going to create a domino effect as far as everything else goes. But, we've just seen in recent years that there's always movement. There's always unexpected trades. There's always, creative, signings when it comes to role players. So I don't know what all those puzzle pieces are ultimately going to do to fit the picture. I just know that it's going to be a fascinating puzzle to see how it sorts out.
And I guess for those who love the game and are inside the sport, those puzzle pieces, the depth that teams will add are ultimately, even though they're not the flashy, sort of headline making moves that happen in the offseason, are the ones that are the most pivotal when it comes to matchups like this, where you've got a roster that just runs out of fuel at the end, basically.
Yeah, and I think the challenging thing about the NBA, it's all about what that team's specific circumstances are, right? I mean, at the end of the day, any NBA team's success or failure always starts with, if you have a definitive star player, how healthy and consistently dominant he can be, how competent and how competent is ownership and their willingness to spend, and then it just trickles down to the quality of depth, the coaching, et cetera. And so when we're looking at a team like the Denver Nuggets, it took years for them to get to this point. Part of it was just drafting Nikola Jokic as a late second round pick and he blossoming into a superstar, which is certainly something they didn't even anticipate, because the reality is if they anticipated that, he would have gotten drafted a lot higher. But I think in recent years, during the first round playoff exit, for example, or even in 2021, or even after the Western Conference Finals appearance in 2020, the Nuggets were of the mind that we need to continue to bolster the roster and add more depth, and not just lean on the laurels of having Nikola Jokic and Jamal Murray. They felt like it was very important to just add additional toppings on the sundae so it tastes a lot better and obviously gives them a better chance to win a title. And here we are. They're one win away from doing that.
I was going to say that strategy on the verge of paying off. Mark, thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It was fun.